Good morning from Glasgow, everyone. It's my pleasure to welcome you here at this session at the EU Pavilion for week 2. This 60-minute session is going to be focusing on our food system, and is titled Tackling Climate Change from Farm to Fork, Transformative Pathways for More Sustainable Food Systems. This session is co-organized by ProVeg International, the Barilla BCFN Foundation, Oatley, and the European Alliance for Plant-Based Foods. We have two challenges today, technically. First of all, I will ask everyone here to use Slido to ask questions. Also online, we will be having the Slido questions here streamed. And second, for the speakers, as we have 4 speakers and a 60-minute session, please stick to the 8 to 9 minutes if you can. I'm going to introduce briefly this session. My name is Rafael Potzelva. I work with ProVeg International, a food awareness organization based in Berlin. And ProVeg International has a very clear goal: reduce the consumption and production of animal products by 50% until the year 2040, especially in the global north. And I think it's a topic that is very relevant here at the EU Pavilion. We have actually just released reduction targets at the European level that ask for a 70 to 80% reduction in the consumption of different animal products, depending on the different animal products. And we work with various stakeholders at the UN level. We've been engaging with the UNFCCC for several years, but also at the EU level with the private sector. And we also have several programs with schools and catering, for example. We also work on the EU-funded Smart Protein projects that works on unlocking the power of alternative proteins and plant-based proteins. So to get back to the title of this session, Transformative Pathways for More Sustainable Food Systems. The Farm to Fork strategy is a key element of the European Green Deal, and its goal is to make food systems fair, healthy, and environmentally friendly. As of today, we know very clearly that this is not the case, as food systems represent 1/3 of global greenhouse gas emissions, but also as animal agriculture represents at least 14.5% of total emissions, but according to a recent Nature article, it's much closer to 20% of emissions. So we also know the challenges, of course, around environmental destruction and deforestation. We were happy to see that those topics were tackled where at least there were some commitments, at least in the first week of COP. But we also know the challenges that we are facing in Europe around non-communicable diseases, and the fact that in general our food system is not at the moment feeding everyone while making other people in the north sick. So we need very clearly, I think, some radical transformation. And how can we produce and shift towards more resilient food systems? We'll have 4 speakers in this session that will explore different pathways. 3 of them are remote: Riccardo Valentini, Simona Castaldi, and Siska Potje. And we have here Cecilia McAlevey. So I will ask each of them to try to stick really to those 8 minutes. And I would now like to give the floor to our first speaker already, Riccardo Valentini, who is the director of the Division of Climate Impact at the Euro-Mediterranean Center on Climate Change. He received the 2007 Nobel Peace Prize with his team for activities within the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. And his research focuses on ecology, agricultural forest systems, and international convention. He is a pioneer in research that is related to agricultural forest system, and is regularly publishing articles in prestigious publications as Science and Nature. Riccardo, the floor is yours for 8 to 10 minutes, please.
Thank you, Rafael. I hope you can hear me. Thanks for this opportunity in the middle of COP, discussing a lot about energy, future of technologies, and so on. It's really important to open a window on the agri-food system. I think that probably there is not yet enough attention to the climate policy on the role of the agri-food system on shaping our future climate. I'd like to present in particular here some interesting results of the European project Suitable Life, funded under the LIFE program of the European Commission, and is coordinated by the Barilla Center for Food and Nutrition with other partners. Next slide, please. Just briefly, as Rafael already said, we know, especially after the IPCC special report on land and climate of 2 years ago, that the overall role of the agricultural system from farm to fork is something like 37% of total greenhouse gas emission, and mostly these impacts are coming from methane and nitrous oxide gases in the greenhouse gas budget. The next slide shows us that in reality, if we look at this amount of impacts, it's almost equivalent to the electricity and the heat sector. So the impact of agricultural system is absolutely important and significant, and we need to do more to rebuild the agri-food supply chain and consumers as well, especially looking at more sustainable, healthy diets. Next slide. So this we have developed a project that is together with our four partners. Barilla said Food Nutrition is the coordinator, and Green Apes startup is in Italy based on digital applications. One of our partners, University of Wageningen, and the Sustainable Restaurant Association UK. We are conducting experiments to see how the people, the consumers, can really reduce the greenhouse gas impacts on climate by eating well and in a sustainable way. And two major locations in Italy and in the UK, addressing several actors of the food systems. Next slide. In particular, we want to push people to adopt healthy, sustainable eating styles. So it's not just a question on sustainability, but also on nutrition and health. And see how it's possible to adopt in canteens, so where the people usually eat during the working time, reduce the impacts of food emissions. Next slide. We have several partners, some important companies like, for example, Ducati Motors or Fresilian or Fortitude, the UK, and the universities as well. So we work on university canteen as well, like University of Worcester, for example, or City of London University. Next. We are engaging quite a lot of people. I would say it's one of the largest social experiments on food and climate, I would say. We have a basin of about 60,000 students in the universities. 40,000 of them are engaged in this process, experimenting new food styles. And over companies, we have 7,000 exposed workers and 1,000 are engaged. We have targets to reduce emissions by 5,300 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. So it's a very concrete project. It's not just wording, but the real actions, and about 2 million cubic meters of water to reduce the water footprint of food. With great potential indeed at the European scale, with important emission reduction that can be scaled up. Let's see some of the results. Next slide, please. First of all, how are we going to do this? We use the life cycle assessment for measuring the impact of food systems, and particularly looking at carbon footprint and water footprint using a large database that was developed during the project from Tashina Peterson and others. Is published now in Nature Scientific Data in a database of more than 3,000 items of food classified in terms of carbon water footprints. Next slide. And of course, we know the big range of impacts from beef, for example, red meat, that is something like almost 30 times more impact in terms of greenhouse gas emissions than, for example, vegetables. And this is a big range, of course, where you have to fit your diet inside this big range, to be also to know that there is up to 30 times more impact if, for example, you eat red meat every day. Next slide. So finally, what is the ideal dish that we have proposed in the project? We have taken the Eat Lancet report on food, and we have taken from them some of the big global targets, like that we have to reduce by 2. We have to stay within 2 degrees at the end of the century, and also that it's equivalent to a boundary of something like 5 gigatons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year. And if you do this exercise, you arrive that a sustainable meal should be for per day something in the order of 2.3 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per capita per person. And you can look at the distribute this during the day. If you take the breakfast is around 20% of these impacts that you have basically that each meal of the day, lunch or dinner, should stay within 0.9 or something like 1 kilogram CO2. This is the target we are aiming. So let's eat as we should to maintain the cooling the planet within 2 degrees. Next slide. And the results of the project, also were not just the emission reduction, but also to push people to, for example, pay attention to plastic packaging, to water savings, and so on. Next slide. But the results were quite interesting because the people involved, engaged in the experiments, both in the companies, workers, as well as students in universities, we could say that at the end we could get something like 30% of emission reductions by adopting a sustainable diet, reducing 500 grams of CO2 per meal. That is not trivial, and reducing 390 liters of virtual water again per meal. So it was very interesting to see that the people has responded quite well, and probably we had also that lockdown difficulties, so the campaigning was not as at high speed as we wanted. But in reality, these are very encouraging data showing that potentially there is if everybody is reducing by 30%, that means moderate, actually consuming just one time per week the red meat, for example, it's something that achieve something like 40 million tons CO2 equivalent per year, an important contribution to the EU target for emission reduction until the 2030, as we know. After that, we have to go for carbon neutrality. But in this time, in this transition, the contribution of the diets will be very important. Next. And I think, yes, I finish here. And thank you for the attention. And we hope that this will have an impact in the future climate policy. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Riccardo, and thank you for this wonderful presentation. You made a lot of us hungry just by having the illustration of vegetables. As for some of us, it's been 1 week full of sandwiches, but it's great. It's great to have you on the panel. Thank you. We're going now to go back to Brussels with our next speaker, Siska Potje, who's an experienced public affairs professional and founder of Future BV, a consultancy guiding organizations through transition. She has a background and PhD in food and agronomy and exercised the function of medical and public affairs directors as Nutricia and Danone. She founded recently the European Plant-Based Food Alliance, a multi-stakeholder platform gathering like-minded companies and organizations around the common goal to advance plant-based foods, I think, of course, with a focus on the EU. Siska, I'll let you the floor for 8 minutes too. Thank you.
Thank you, Raphael, and thank you very much for inviting me to this very interesting conference at COP26, and also for the kind introduction. So I will just briefly explain how we as the APF, as the European Alliance for Plant-Based Foods, see the transformative pathways to more sustainable food systems. Next slide, please. So as Raphael already explained, so the European Alliance of Plant-Based Foods gathers all companies and stakeholders who have a common ambition to put the plant-based foods at the heart of the transition towards more sustainable food systems. So our goal is really to have a strong voice in Europe to defend the interests of the plant-based food sector and to create, first of all, a level playing field for the plant-based foods, also to promote innovation and research for the plant-based foods, and last but not least, also to empower the consumer to make informed choices. Next slide, please. So we are currently steadily growing our membership base, and I would like to invite also all companies and stakeholders listening into this conference to join us, to become member, and to support us in our activities to really create a level playing field for the plant-based foods. Next slide, please. So as the European Alliance, we really welcome the strong European political commitment concerning the Farm to Fork strategy and really the intention to shift towards more sustainable food systems, which is expressed in the Farm to Fork and the Green Deal and also in the European Beating Cancer Plan. So I think this is a very good ambition. We hope, of course, that it will be translated in clear rules and policies to really make it happen. So, and also within COP26, we would hope that there is more attention to the potential of the food systems to really work and on the climate issues. So far, I heard several initiatives, but not so much. So I think there urgently needs to be more attention also for the food systems in reducing the issues on climate change. Next slide, please. So, and it was also already explained or highlighted by the previous speaker, and also the science is very clear that a shift in the food systems and in the diets towards more plant-based diets really is a key enabler to reduce the emissions from the farming sector, so both on methane and also on CO2. So I think there's no doubt about it. It was also expressed in the results of the studies of the previous speaker. Next slide, please. And I think if we are really serious about moving towards a more sustainable food system, then we also need to adapt to the current framework. Because, of course, the regulatory framework and the policy framework we have today is a result of cultural habits from the past, but also decisions that we have taken in the past, which are largely favoring the animal production and also the animal products. So, and the food regulations, so the food law was created about a decade ago as well. And the core, I would say, purpose at that time was the food safety and food security. But the food law also lacks completely the sustainability dimension. And several current regulations are really ill-suited for new innovations of sustainable food products. So there's also an urgent need to change. So this is just to create a level playing field. But of course, if we would like to accelerate the transition towards more sustainable food systems, then we will need also specific policies and I would say policies and regulations that actively support the plant-based food sector, making the sustainable plant-based choice, I would say, the most affordable and also the most accessible choice. So these are, according to the Alliance, really pathways that we need to develop to really transition the food systems. So in the next slide or in the next slides, I will explain in more detail several of the current regulations which should be adapted to really create a level playing field. Next slide, please. So I will start with the most obvious one. So the most obvious one and also the most important one is the European Agriculture Food Policy, so the CAP. So this is, of course, the key instrument for the European farming sector to really set the base for the transition. So, and it would be our ask from the Alliance to have much more funding to facilitate the transition. So more funding for the European food crops, not feed crops, but food crops, and also having sufficient funding to accelerate the transition to reduce the intensive livestock farming and to help farmers transition towards more sustainable farming practices. So that is, of course, key. In the next slide, I will also explain some other policies which are very closely linked, I would say, to the agriculture policy, for instance, European promotion policy. So a lot of European funding is given to promote specific agricultural products. And also there's a huge imbalance currently between what is promoted. Over 60% of all the funding goes to funding of animal production and animal products. So we also would like to rebalance that and also have the possibility, and not only for vegetables and fruits and nuts, but also for the products made from these ingredients, so the plant-based foods, they should also be eligible for specific funding. So also educating, informing the public on the sustainable agriculture products. Linked to that, we also have the European Public Procurement Policy. This is also a very handy instrument to bring people into contact with healthy, sustainable food. So, but currently the European public procurement policy, so the tendering, is focused mostly on cost, so reduction of cost, and that of course results also in a bias where cheap meat and dairy products are often offered in public canteens, in schools, etc. So also there we think there is an urgent need to also take into account the sustainability criteria in the tendering, and then also why not setting minimal criterion for offering also plant-based foods in public canteens. And then also linked to that, we also have the school schemes, which is also funded by Europe. So milk is distributed in schools, but also there's currently no option to also offer the sustainable alternatives. So the plant-based milks are not offered. So this is also highly discriminating, and also not the right way to go, because you have to learn from young age also the sustainable alternatives. Next slide, please. So, and then another important topic is, of course, the VIT, so the value-added tax. So we all know that the value-added tax makes a significant proportion of the consumer price of a product. So, and also there we see huge discrepancies between the VIT for animal products and for plant-based products. So, for instance, in some member states, the VIT on, I would say, plant-based alternative milk can be 2 to 3 times as high as the VIT on regular milk. So, which is, of course, very discriminatory. And the same goes for the plant-based meat. In some member states, the VIT on plant-based meat is up to 90%. So this, of course, is not very helpful to make the products affordable. So we are asking to have a new approach on VIT to really create a level playing field, and also mostly to make the products affordable, because I think at the end of the day, that is the goal, to make the more sustainable products the most affordable and accessible products. Next slide, please. So another topic on which we are active with the Alliance is, of course, on the research. Research is very important. As you know, for instance, also the plant-based food sector is a very young sector, and a lot of research is still needed. And also there we would like to make sure that sufficient funding is provided for the research of the more sustainable agriculture on plant-based food, etc. So this is also something which we advocate for, because a lot still needs to be researched, and a lot of funding is needed. And also there, if there's need for a reduction of the funding in research, then definitely this should not be done on the plant-based food sector or on the sustainable alternative sector, because these needs to be researched. I would say much more than before. And then another topic which is important, and in which the European regulations can play an important role, is, of course, the private funding, because we all know that investors and banks, so they have a huge leverage and a huge potential to transform the food systems, but I think they need also to be helped. And I think the current initiatives from the European Commission in sustainable financing, and also setting up EU taxonomy. So the EU taxonomy, so where the Commission tries to define or to put criteria to decide which economic activity is sustainable and which is less sustainable. So I think these initiatives can be very helpful for investors to invest in the more sustainable economic activities. And in that respect, we really urge the Commission also to set criteria for the farming, for the agro-farming sector, so to define what is sustainable and what is less sustainable, because that could help investors to redirect financing, the current financing for the less intensive livestock farming, towards the more sustainable farming practices, and also products and innovations. So this is also something which we are active on. Next slide, please.
Siska, we are like over time. I think we have.
Okay, then I think I can wrap up. I hope this gives already a good indication on what we are active on, what needs to be done. And yeah, if you can go to the last slide. And so if anyone wants to have more information, you can find it on our website. And also, I'm very happy, drop me an email. I'm very happy to explain in more detail. So thank you for your attention and happy to take questions later on in the discussion.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Siska. And if you have questions, again, please use Slido so we can have access to the questions and ask them later. Our third speaker is Simona Castaldi, Professor of Ecology at Università degli Studi della Campania, Luigi Vanvitelli. She's a fellow at the University of Edinburgh, coordinating project on ecosystem services, sustainable land management, climate and global changes, and sustainability of the food chain. Simona, you are scientific consultant with many prestigious institutions, including the BCFN, Barilla Center for Food and Nutrition, and WWF. And I leave you the floor again for 8 minutes. Thank you, Simona.
Thank you, Rafael. Yes, I'm here. I will describe a little bit what we are doing with this European project, live project called Desert Adapt. Next, please. Desert Adapt works in a very specific condition. In area of Europe where land degradation is a strong issue and there is a strong also risk of desertification as a result of a combination of climate change and the land use and management, which are bringing to loss of ecosystem services, of the natural capital, decreased productivity of the land, so impoverishment, land abandonment, and social crisis. Next, please. In this slide, you can see the picture from the sites that are located in Spain, Portugal, and in southern Italy, in Sicily. And this landscape that you see can be like this from, let's say, July, June, November. In this condition, in general, people is expected to be anyway productive to support their business. And it is very complex. Next, please. It will be even more complex in the future because the projection in the next 30 years are expected to have a further increase of temperature with almost all the scenarios. Next, please. And this increase goes together with a further reduction of, at least for the Mediterranean basin, of rainfall. And we also have done some simulations showing that the worst period to which the picture we're referring to indeed is becoming even drier in the future years. Next, please. And in this condition, people is expected indeed to apply the farm-to-fork strategy, so to have a condition of higher sustainability of food production, tackling climate change, having a more just transition for economic businesses, which is very difficult. So they have to transition absolutely in a sustainable way to survive, but at the same time, these conditions are very difficult to work. And we are testing what could be possible to do and which are the obstacles. Next, please. So we are proposing a kind of adaptive multifunctional escape approach that is based on 3 pillars. So on functions that look at the economy of the area, at the environmental improvement and societal improvement. Next, please. So we propose a mosaic of function where using their own resources, also natural resources, they push for economic production that are sustainable and they dedicate some of their land to ecological functions. We use adapted species, adaptation measures, nature-based solutions that are cheaper than technological solutions, and then they create a positive cost-benefit balance because often they are really on the limit of their potential in the economical terms. Next, please. And so, for example, it is important not only what you do, for example, if you are using an adapted species like pistachio to the dry climate, but also how you do it. So you have to introduce, to survive in this condition, adaptation measures that allow the plants to survive in dry conditions, but also to be less impactful on your environment. Next, please. This is an example of changes that we have been doing, for example, for animal breeding. In the first case, we had animals that were grazing all over all the time. Then we changed the approach with a more concentrated rotation over time, and we passed from the landscape on the top left, where from July you have nothing left. You have the soil that is there, you have soil erosion and land degradation, and then so you need also to produce cereals to feed the animals during the summer. We passed to this other situation in the same area where instead the grass grows all the time, covers the soil, is sufficient for the animal, and so a very little amount of cereal is needed just for some cases, and so the cereal production can be less intensive, be organic, use no till, no glyphosate, and everything then becomes much more sustainable. Another example in the next slide is, for example, these municipalities, they were destroying the natural aromatic shrubs that grow there in Spain because of the fire risk. In this case, we have proposed an alternative. Rather than destroy and disturb the soil and increase, for example, the soil erosion, they can collect the material and they can work with the local businesses that use these aromatic plants to produce oil and to produce cosmetics and pharmaceutics then that can be sold also in the sustainable market, let's say. So these are just examples. Next, please. We have tested this kind of approaches on 9 case studies of public and private lands, and we have tried to understand which were the successful solutions and also the main problems of implementation. Next, please. So we have come with a list of main obstacles that are really important because they require policy attention. So first of all, we have found that climate extremes were beyond our expectations. So every year, the situation there is worse than the year before. So higher drought, higher temperatures. So this really requires an urgent solution in terms of transformative pathway and support. Then in this condition of, we have strong competition for manpower and water on small farmers from big agro companies. So this creates an enormous pressure for small farmers to do anything. The cost of measures, of course, often are not covered by subsidies. So for a small farmer, this is an issue. They often lack of awareness and knowledge. So to know what to do and how to do it needs training and needs a dedicated formation for these people that at the moment is lacking. Another thing that is fundamental is the technical support for the sustainable management planning, because it's a complex things to do and to implement. And often small municipalities or small farmers do not have the personnel, but they also do not have the money to pay dedicated personnel. And they do not have any network that support them. And this can be also a problem, for example, for complex bureaucracy that we have found when implementing plans for public areas that again require a good technical dedicated staff. And also sometimes conflict with the other EU framework, which again require technical dedicated staff that this people doesn't have. So these are all issues that need to be taken into account if the implementation for sustainable management needs to be done in this area. And in the last slide, there is another point that is clear for us. So all this effort that is enormous for these people needs to be recognized somehow. So we need a clear and effective, framework, and we need to have a certification, not only of carbon footprint, but also of other indicators. And we also needed to support this farmer with for the competition that they can find on the market. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Simona. Thank you for this great presentation. And I'm very much looking forward to the questions we will have possibly on these topics. Our last speaker today is Cecilia McAlevey, Director of Sustainable Eating and Public Affairs at Oatley. Cecilia is a committed spokesperson on sustainable food systems and plant-based diets to tackle climate change. She has a lot of experience around sustainability from journalism to the European Commissions. I'm not going to go into the details, but she joined Oatley in 2016 and is also the president of the trade organization Plant Foods Sweden and sits on the steering committee of the recently launched UK Alliance for Plant-Based Foods and the Pan-European Initiative, European Alliance for Plant-Based Food, EAPF. Sorry. Your floor is yours.
Thank you. So based on what we've heard here already today, first of all, Oatley is a company who make oat-based drinks, and we are about facilitating a shift from traditional animal-based dairy products to plant-based dairy products. That's where we think we can bring a value to the people and the world. We know science has shown us that we need to do this shift, and as we've heard today. So on top of that, I would like to just share with you 3 examples, because what I have learned over and what I find is very inspiring and hopeful, and also here in Glasgow at COP26, you can see there's so many young people and consumers willing to change their behavior in order to tackle climate change. That is very, very inspiring. And there is also where I would like to really challenge our politicians. Why don't we have food at the agenda of the COP26? And I'm really grateful that we're having this space today to raise this, Raphael. So I think the power of good examples and good stories and inspiration, that is what we need also to create engagement. So the examples I would like to share, which we have experienced from, is I would like to talk about empowerment of farmers, empowerment of consumers, and also empowerment of chefs. Those are 3 key stakeholders, I think, if you would agree with me. So starting with, I'll tell you a story about Adam. So Adam is a farmer in Sweden. He runs this small farm. He was going to take it over from his parents. And you know, if you run a farm and if you're going to make it profitable, you need to increase volumes. And they were raising sheep. I always say that wrongly. I hope I say that right now. Sheeps or cheaps, that does change the meaning of the word, So, but that's what he was raising. And so, of course, in order for it to be profitable, you need to increase the volumes. But he knew that is not what we need to do. So he turned to Oatley and asked, could we maybe collaborate? Could we see a way how I can shift what we produce from the farm to produce more crops for human consumption? And so we connected him together with an amazing researcher named Elin Rös. So they started doing a project looking how to diversify what the farm produced. So from year 1, what the farm produced was 90% animal production and 10% production for human consumption. And just with a slight increase of crops farmed for human consumption from 10 to 20, I have a little note, 26%. So he still had animal production. It's incredible, the results, because from the outset, what the farm produced, he could feed 60 people in year 1. With this small change, because that's small, you would agree with me, the farm could actually feed 3 as many people, 188 people. So we're talking about a small farm, but I think still that the results here is very, very fascinating. And when it comes to the emission of greenhouse gases, that was more than halved. It went from 1.7 ton per person to 0.72 tons a person. And of course, much effective land use goes with that. And also biodiversity increased. It's a beautiful project. So what then happened was that we wanted to do this at a larger scale, and there is a UNISECO project. So we were going to recruit 10 farmers. And we were a bit concerned because, as you know, there's a very polarized debate out there. And we were very concerned that no farmer would be interested in applying to take part in this project. But on the contrary, so again, Sweden is a small country. More than 120 farmers applied to be part of this transition project. And we appointed 10, and they were now doing fantastic studies. Happy to share more about it for those of you who are interested. Just contact us. What I find striking, though, the common denominator among all those farmers, when we had the conversation and interviews, was that they felt there was no platform to discuss transition. All we hear is that we need to preserve, and there's a crisis, and and there is graceland. So no, there is a huge willingness to do the transition for those very reasons which Adam has chosen to do. We need to provide a platform and not use that voice in the wrong direction. That is a really important message I want to convey. Secondly, so Adam is a fantastic source of inspiration, and I wish he could have been here with us telling his story himself. Secondly, secondly, I would like to talk about the empowerment of consumers. We know, we've had a petition run in Germany, for instance. We know that there's a huge demand among consumers to know what is the climate footprint. We've heard some really interesting presentations here today already. So we believe, and this is very important also in the context of the European Commission work on developing product environment footprint, it's so important to empower consumers because today we have the price, which is completely misleading when it comes to guide consumer behavior or shift. We are lacking figures. We need to put numbers in terms of what is the climate footprint. It would be fantastic. And then one would argue, but it doesn't mean anything. It does. Everybody knows if 0.2 is less than 57. We're trained in that. That is easy to understand. And that would also be very powerful in order to know, okay, what is my own individual footprint then? Only by having the figures you can start having a budget that you use in order to change your own behavior. So we really believe that it's not about putting the responsibility on the individuals, because it's also driving throughout the value chain. How phenomenal if climate footprint becomes the competitive advantage within the sector. So it's also driving the entire value chain, but we need to work together. So that was my second, and we do it. We print the carbon footprint on our products here within EU. We're not able to do it in US yet, and it's different footprint for different markets. It's a hellish job. Sorry for swearing, I didn't mean that. But it is. But it should be done, and it can be done. We wanted to prove that as well. So thirdly, am I okay for time, Rafael?
Okay. Yes,
I'm okay?
1.5 minutes.
So my third example, something we did. So there's a beautiful woman on my team called Melina, who is super engaged. She has a very interesting background. She is a political scientist and also a gastronomist. So she has trained school chefs. Because of course we have, if you look at plant-based products replacing the traditional animal-based products like dairy, they behave differently. They taste differently, and you need to work with them differently. They're delicious, but you need to understand how they work, because we've been so programmed and taught something else in our society. So she has trained 150 school chefs in Sweden with something called Oatley. And it's fantastic, the engagement, and there's like a cook-along session, and also teaching about what is the climate footprint, because it is like we heard Siska talking about earlier. Today you have to it's price in public procurement, but actually you have such a big and important role. The public kitchens and the public catering is such an important arena for transition, and that it must taste good, but it's also, if you can communicate, if you're the chef and you feel a pride that you can contribute in this, because there is a keen hunger, I would say, among young people to know more. So therefore we're doing that. So there's no commercial thing for us, but it's also, again, to show, because we really believe in the power of good examples. And we've also created this award about the climate kitchen, because you need the inspirations, because you do that out of your own will. So those are the three examples I would just like to share here today, to do something concrete, to empower people to actually drive the change that we know is necessary. So thanks.
Thank you so much, Cecilia. It's very inspiring, and I think we had a very diverse yet very interesting pathways introduced today on transforming our food systems. I don't know if I can access the Slido questions, and I would suggest probably taking two and having a round with speakers and seeing which one we could take. All right, we have one. This session would suggest that sustainable food is only plant-based. Should sustainable food be produced locally and promote local sources of proteins? This is a first question where I think we can have a short round, starting maybe with the same order. Ricardo, Siska. So Ricardo, on the question of is only plant-based food sustainable, and does it has to be also, should sustainable food be produced locally and promote local sources of proteins?
Well, so far, the system is exactly like this. animal food is unsustainable, and that's what the data, scientific data produced for us. But of course, we need to look also at the potential future scenarios where maybe some better technology can be also brought in. As a scientist, I'm open to say that, for example, animal diets and the way in which we can reduce the greenhouse gas emissions by circular economy processes in farming, livestock farming, could be a way to reduce the impact of meat and the greenhouse gas emissions. So, I mean, I will not put only on the hydrological part. That is okay. If you want to be vegetarian or vegan, it's your choice. But in terms of scientific impacts on the environment, you probably could use technologies for reducing the impacts of livestock. So this is, of course, not yet done. It's absolutely crazy what the livestock systems are doing. But I could say that in the future this could possibly become more sustainable.
Thank you, Riccardo. Maybe Siska?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I think as the Plant-Based Food Alliance, we obviously promote plant-based food as one of the key solutions. But of course, we have to be realistic. If you want to feed the world sustainably, I think there will be many solutions. So, and I would say plant-based foods is the most the most accessible solution because it's known, it exists already. So it's accepted by consumers. So I think it's the fastest way to more sustainable food. But to feed the world, the entire world sustainably, I think there will be many options to do so. And then, of course, there are also, next to plant-based, there are also yet alternative proteins as well who can provide the leverage. But of course, as the plant-based foods, we advocate for the plant-based foods as being I would say the best choice or the easiest choice or the fastest way forward to more sustainable food systems.
Thank you, Simona.
Yeah, first of all, definitely there is a large margin for the producers of meat to improve their footprint. So this is for sure an element. The second element I would say is that when we speak about meat or plant-based food, we have to consider that, for example, in Europe, in a study that we have been doing recently, we have calculated, but probably this is also known, that people consume about 8 times more per week red meat than what a normal dietitian would suggest in a normal average omnivorous diet. So a diet that even includes red meat once per week. So we really, if we only were doing what we are supposed to do for health, just for a normal omnivorous diet, we should reduce by 7 times the amount of red meat that we eat. So there is a large space for reduction of meat in a healthy way, the excess that we eat. So we really have to change our style of nutrition, not only of the course of production.
Thank you very much, Simona. I'll let see Cecilia comment on that.
Yeah, I think we've heard already. I agree with the prior speakers, and we are in a system where we just consume too much. We need to drastically change. So I think it's very good that there is a strong advocacy for the plant-based shift. We will not end up in a place where there's an entire 100% plant-based food system. So I think that we just need to aim that way, and that is where we need to increase awareness. So yeah, that would be my response.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting point, and just to add to that, I think it's something where we can build consensus. Actually, we can build agreement on the fact that the consumption in my home country in France is around 80-90 kilograms a year per inhabitant. It's 7-8 times more than what dietary guidelines recommend, or like the WHO for healthy diets has also very clear recommendations. So maybe we can ask ourselves the question: is it really extreme to ask for a massive reduction on that when it's actually what is being recommended by health experts, not to mention, of course, the climate and environment community. I would like to see the questions again on Slido, if that's possible, and see if we can take some more. Are there issues arising from branding and protected terms as more companies try to monopolize on emerging dairy and animal protein alternatives? So are there issues arising from branding and protected terms as more companies try to monopolize on emerging dairy and animal protein alternatives? I don't know who wants to start with that question. I think maybe Siska would be a good person to start with.
Well, if I understand the question right, are there issues? I think there are issues definitely in the denominations of plant-based foods because the current regulation does not allow to use plant-based alternatives to milk or dairy. So the meat and the dairy sector, they have marketing standards which really clearly protect them, protect also the terms and much more. So I would say this is an issue because this is really hindering clear consumer communication on the plant-based alternatives. So in that direction, say, yes, there's work to do. So there should be more open to have the possibility to communicate clearly to the consumer what the product is meant for. So it's the functionality of the product. And of course, you can argue there's lots of discussions. Do you need to have to be an alternative? But that is the easiest way because consumers are so used to these products, so and it indicates to the consumer which product they can use as an alternative for which in the diet without changing too much. And we know from studies once they have done the change, then they get much more creative and try new things and alternative things. So yes, I would say there is a clear need to work on this. The second part of the question, I think it's more, if you can put it back on slide, because I think it's more difficult. It was on specific companies, but could you put it up back?
Slido?
The Slido, yeah.
So they try to monopolize on emerging dairy. I think, yeah, every company then chooses a name and then probably protects the name of their product. I think this is, I think this is current practice, but I think the key problem is the denomination issue, the denomination. So that would be my advice to work on this.
Thank you, Siska. I think maybe Cecilia on the topic. Do you have like any insights?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you followed it, but there was this what was called the Amendment 165 and Amendment 171, which were introduced by the European Parliament, and where there were strong forces trying to forbid plant-based burgers to be called plant-based burgers because they would be confused with meat burgers. So that amendment did get rejected. However, the plenary did vote on including Amendment 171, which was absolutely absurd because you were not allowed to in any way reference traditional dairy products by describing a plant-based option by saying that it didn't contain milk, because you weren't allowed to use or use as cooking cream or creamy and things like that. So that was so absurd, but thanks to an extreme strong engagement among citizens, there was a petition raising almost 500,000 signatures, and where we were many people, NGOs and business and farmers and so forth, who joined forces and tried to show how ridiculous this was. So it is absolutely an issue, and we shouldn't let things like that stop the development we have to promote. We know we need to shift.
Thank you, Cecilia. I think I would like to take another question and maybe jump to have Ricardo and Simona. Have you considered that not all land is suited to crop growth? 60% of UK is best suited to grass. If it wasn't used for livestock, it couldn't produce food. So this question of like also crop growth and like the use of land, I would like to have like maybe Simona and then Ricardo on that.
Yeah, I mean, in the approach that I was showing before, you have a mosaic, a land that is a mosaic. And indeed, probably the best option when you consider what you do is to find the right balance of functions. So what is the economic function and what is the ecological function of your land? And when you take a full land approach, basically, you can consider the emission, the sequestration, the sinks, and then have the full view of what you can do. And we don't have to forget that we consider climate and so the carbon sequestration as a reference, but sustainability also in the acception of the farm to fork strategy means a lot of other things, and there are a lot of other planetary boundaries that need to be respected. So probably all this should be taken into consideration when planning the landscape and the functionality of the landscape.
Thank you. Ricardo, maybe?
Yes, I don't think this is an argument for continuing to do livestock because the land is already used for that. I mean, I don't really exactly believe that you can do any other crops, just grasses. I think things that can evolve. So I don't see the fact that you have just to stay with grass production. You can do other type of crops, of course, and growing other products that are useful for human diets. So I would not say that it's so black and white. I mean, of course, there is a question about the social farming question that the farmers are used to do historically practices, and this creates maybe a cultural change, a big shock or something like that. But we need to really start a transition. So I think we have to do this new transformation and helping also farmers to go in a good direction.
Thank you, Ricardo. And of course, it's not a black and white issue, and there is so specific context in different locations. However, I think we all acknowledge the fact that the current level of production is completely unsustainable and needs to be drastically reduced, especially in Europe. So I think there are very good arguments on that, and there is also good practices, of course, like agroecology, which is a topic that we follow and that we discuss a lot with other countries, especially in the south and Senegal and other places that have shown some interesting level of efficiency. I don't know if Siska and Cecilia, you wanted to react to this question. If not, I would suggest that we have a last round, either with a question or with concluding statements that we could have on what needs to happen to move forward. I think we're going to go probably for the way forward, because this COP we're in the second week, we're in the midterms kind of, and we already seen some commitments in week one, some interesting things going on around methane, around deforestation, and we saw at the methane pavilion also the mention of the fact that it's livestock is the first cause in front of actually the fossil fuels. So there is a lot of things that we're discussing this year at COP. Food didn't make it yet completely on the agenda, I would say, as it should have been, but we're seeing progress a little bit on the catering, on this and that, some normalization of vegetarian and vegan sandwiches, so that's great. But I would like to ask, and we're probably just going to go with Ricardo, Simona, and Siska first, just in 1 minute, what do you think needs to happen at the European level, and how can we leverage this UN process, this craziness of 2 weeks of COP, to also make progresses in our food system in Europe? Ricardo, if you would like to start.
Thank you, Rafael. I think as you correctly said, there is not enough discussion in the COP on the food system. I would like to bring in one point, that is that European farmers are usually quite aware of the impacts of their production. And what is missing is to balance globally this. Okay, we cannot just import emissions from other countries that produce unsustainable and push our farmers to do, low impact agriculture with a lot of investments and a lot of costs. So we need to rebalance this globally. Meaning, for example, that at some point we should reconsider the food products inside the border tax mechanism, the carbon taxes, because we want to have high quality, low emission agriculture in Europe, and we are doing that with Fund for Strategies going this direction, but we cannot live in a world where everybody's doing other things and our products are penalized by our choices. So I would go for a border tax for food as soon as possible.
Thank you, Ricardo. Thank you for the statement. I will then go to Simona, maybe for or Siska. Sorry, we're with Siska. So we're switching. Siska, also for 1 minute, what needs to happen now, and how can we use COP?
Well, I think at European, your first question was at the European level. So as I clearly explained in the presentation, I think we need the policies and the regulations adapted to really facilitate the shift, because there is a clear ambition expressed, but now we have to make it practical. Ideally, they would set targets or targets, intermediate targets, and to walk towards through different initiatives. And also within Europe, it is recognized, but still, if you look to the plant-based foods, so it's not always as clear. They speak about fruits, nuts, vegetables, but it's very sensitive. And in my point, what needs to happen, you need to start at the farming. You really need to have the transition, you need to facilitate the transition with the right subsidies and the right technologies to really help the farmers to bring an alternative also for those farmers who have to change and who will lose out on their current activities. I think this of course is key from the farmers, and then of course to all the other initiatives we need to do in parallel. We need to inform the public, we need to empower the public, we need to work on the regulations, as I said. So we need to do a lot and all in parallel, but we do need to give an alternative to those who will lose out, to have a clear view and a clear help to transition themselves towards other systems to be part of the solution.
Thank you, and we'll have to close soon. So Simona, if you have 30 seconds.
Yeah, my opinion is that people is very much willing to eat more sustainably, and also producer to produce more sustainably. So what is needed now is really a system of recognition of this. So people in this jungle of products that is coming out, and everybody wants to take this word sustainability in their hands. So we really need an harmonized system of recognition, certification at EU level that everybody can use to recognize what is sustainable and why and how from what is less sustainable. So this is I think my suggestion.
Thank you. And Cecilia, if you have one.
Yes, food system in the heart of climate policies as national and governmental levels, and food COP27. Also fair and just transition. I think that is really important. This is not one against the other. It's really, we need to shift, and we need to do it for the sake of our kids.
Thank you, Cecilia. I would like, in the name of ProVeg International, to thank the EU Pavilion for organizing this, and it worked very well, so we're very happy that everything worked out. Thank you to the BCFN Barilla Foundation, to the European Alliance for Plant-Based Foods, and to Oatley for also working with us on this. I think the key message, listen to science, listen to Ricardo, who's been working with the IPCC for a long time. We have to listen to experts and acknowledge the fact that we cannot achieve the Paris Agreement with the current level of meat consumption and dairy consumption in Europe. It is absolutely key that we move towards more sustainable production, but also that we shift towards more plant-rich diets. It would also save us a lot of costs from a health perspective and other perspective. So yeah, we hope that we're going to put it on the menu of COP27 a little bit more. And I would like to thank everyone for coming to this event, and I wish you a great second part of COP. Thank you.